Well, happy Wednesday, everyone. In light of all that's been going on in the world in the last couple of weeks, a lot of the news that we're seeing is negative. I thought today it might be a little more interesting for me to talk about an inspirational story. It was triggered by a finding. I saw this on the BBC just earlier today, that they discovered the wreck of the Endurance, a wooden sailing ship from the early 1900s. Now, you may or may not be familiar with the ship, but it was the ship that carried Sir Ernest Shackleton on his very famous voyage into the Antarctic. So to give you an overview, Sir Ernest Shackleton was an explorer. He liked doing a whole bunch of different things and exploring. He was kind of driven that way. And so he had wanted to reach the South Pole before anybody else. He didn't do that. He got very close, but someone else made it there before him. So he decided he was going to be the first person to go across the entire Antarctic continent. And so after much preparation and fundraising and getting helpers and sailors, he set out with a team of 28 sailors on the ship Endurance. And they set out on December 5th in 1914. Well, unfortunately, as they made their way through the Weddell Sea to towards the Antarctic actual ice, their ship got frozen in the ice about a month and a half later. And they were hoping that it would get released, but after another 2 months, Shackleton realized that they were stuck. There was no way it was going to thaw before spring. And so for the next 7 months, the men lived on the ice floe alongside of their ship. When spring finally arrived in September of that year, they were hopeful that the ice would melt and they could kind of get back on their ship. But what they found was the ship was no longer seaworthy. In fact, it was cracked. It had a hole in it. It was beginning to take on water, and they realized there was no hope of ever getting the ship back. And so they took everything off the ship, and about 45 days later, the ship finally sunk beneath the waves, the very ship that they just found and discovered. Some amazing pictures if you go look it up. But this is where the story gets really interesting, because now Shackleton and his crew of 28 are stuck on this ice floe in the Antarctic with no ship. They have 3 little lifeboats that they saved. And what they hoped was that the ice floe would gradually drift out towards a place where there might be islands or some type of shipping lane. And so they did that. And for the next 4 months, they stayed on this ice floe as it floated around. And they finally realized it was never going to get where they needed it to go, but they were as close as they could get. And so they got into these 3 little lifeboats, all these men, and they undertook this hazardous 400-mile journey to Elephant Island. It was very dangerous, very harrowing, and they finally arrived on that island. And it had been almost 500 days since they had set foot on any kind of solid land. Crazy. Except the story's not done, because they found that this island was nowhere close to any shipping lanes. No one was going to come rescue them. They would end up dying there. And so Shackleton and 6 others decided to take the largest lifeboat, which was 20 feet. That's not very big. And they were going to take this 700-mile journey across the ocean to a place where they knew there was a whaling station. And they took 4 weeks of provisions, not enough any more than that, because he said, if we don't make it by then, we're all dead. And so they took 15 days to go across this distance, supreme efforts of navigation. They had to face hurricanes. They finally arrived at this island, and they were so battered, they finally were able to get ashore on the south end of the island, except that the whaling station was on the north end. And so now Shackleton and 3 others had to go across 30-some miles of mountainous, icy terrain just to get to the north end of the island, because to sail around the island was too risky. And so they would stick nails in their boots so they had some type of grip, and 50 feet of rope, and they made this impossible journey to the north side of the island. And then once they were discovered, they went through the whole process over the next months of retrieving the rest of their crew from Elephant Island and everywhere else. And it was in 1917, 2.5 years after he started, that he finally set foot back in England. Now, what's fascinating about this story is Shackleton, in his lifetime, he never got to the South Pole. He never went across the Antarctic. He died not that long after this expedition. He died in debt, penniless, and his contemporaries were the ones who had all the statues and monuments. Scott, who had got to the South Pole, had all these memories of him, and for many, many decades, Shackleton's name was irrelevant. Until about 50 years later, people began to examine his story. And what began to happen was Shackleton began to be recognized for his leadership, his tenacity, his determination, his ability to inspire men and to do crazy and impossible things. And some of the contemporaries of his who had had more popularity earlier began to fade into insignificance. And today, Shackleton's story is well known with books and all kinds of things being written about it because of his skills in leadership and determination. And so it made me wonder, how do we define success for ourselves? It's probably not in the things we accomplish, the money we make, the successes we have at work. But just as Jesus so long ago directed us to disciple other people and invest our lives in them, I wonder if at the end of our lives, what makes a difference, what we'll be remembered for, the legacy we'll have not just here in this life, but in the next, are the people that we influence, the people we lead, the people we connect to, the people we invest our lives in, just like Shackleton. So I hope that inspires you today to invest in others. And if you're curious, read more about his story. It's a fascinating one. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. Till next time, see you later.